Aplauso. Gracias por hacer el esfuerzo. Vemos que está la mañana lluviosa, me está lloviendo muchos WhatsApps de gente que está por incorporarse, pero bueno, gracias. Y me parece que el video explica muy bien. Desde Promotora Social México buscamos impulsar proyectos que cambien vidas en sentido de educación, de salud y de desarrollo económico. Para esto tenemos 3 vehículos de incidencia. Uno tiene que ver con la filantropía estratégica, que por aquí está mi colega Oli. Oli, ahí está por ahí Oli. La inversión de impacto, Rodolfo, y la tercera línea que llevo, que es el ecosistema de impacto social, y es crear las condiciones que promuevan y favorezcan el ecosistema de impacto social. ¿Para qué? Para resolver los problemas más apremiantes que tenemos en este país. Y justamente este espacio tiene el propósito de provocar reflexiones, de catalizar iniciativas. Ustedes fueron invitados en particular porque sé que tienen iniciativas de colaboración multisectorial y hoy tenemos la fortuna de tener una leyenda, yo diría, en tema de solución de conflictos, en tema de colaboración. Nos viene a mostrar un nuevo paradigma sobre cómo colaborar, cuándo colaborar, en fin, ha escrito libros como Solución de Problemas Complejos, como Poder y Amor, como escenarios sociales transformadores y recientemente colaborando con el enemigo, que yo creo por eso tenemos mucha gente interesada en conocer qué nos tiene Adam de sus experiencias, en fin, de sus lecciones aprendidas. Y el espacio pretende ser íntimo, interactivo, una charla animada justamente por Araceli Campos, directora del Impact Hub, en donde los invito, digo, de manera ordenada, me hacen una seña y les puedo acercar un micrófono para justamente aprovechar la experiencia que tiene Adam. Ha trabajado en posiciones directivas y estratégicas en Royal Dutch Shell, en Pacific Gas and Electric Co., y en el Instituto de Análisis de Sistemas Aplicados. Posiciones en San Francisco, en Londres, en París, ahora dirigiendo Reos Partners desde Montreal. Y nada, pues gracias, aprovechemos el tiempo. Un aplauso.
Hola, buen día. Mi nombre es Araceli Campos. Tengo el gran honor de dirigir el Impact Hub en la Ciudad de México. Y I'm going to switch to English for Aiden.
I was wondering when we were going to switch. Yeah.
And so first of all, it's very interesting the fact that you're here in Mexico for a specific purpose. And I know that Verónica Vaz is here from México's Posibles, so it will be very interesting if you can tell us more of your job here in Mexico and México's Posibles. ¿Un micro?
Bueno, pues en un par de minutos les digo brevemente por qué está Adam en México este fin de semana. Hace 3 años un grupo de mexicanos muy preocupados por la situación del país buscaron a Adam por toda la experiencia internacional que tiene y le dijeron: queremos que vengas a México. El equipo de Adam hizo 180 entrevistas en todo el país, entrevistas de lo más diversas posibles para hacer un diagnóstico. Algunos de los puntos de ese diagnóstico era: las personas tienen una enorme desconfianza los unos de los otros, no nada más de personas que trabajan en otros sectores, sino hacia dentro de sus mismos sectores. No hay espacios plurales de trabajo y los mexicanos no se están escuchando entre sí. Entonces, una de las sugerencias de Adam fue: creen un grupo de líderes lo más diversos que se pueda y encierren los 3 fines de semana a dialogar, a ver qué pasa, y con la metodología del equipo de Reos, que es la consultora en la que está Adam, con esta metodología vamos a llevarlos por todo un proceso de diálogo y de colaboración. Se hizo ese ejercicio con una primer generación hace ya más de un año. Acabó esa generación y este fin de semana comenzamos la segunda generación de 40 líderes que va a dialogar 3 fines de semana. Y ha sido de las experiencias más transformadoras para las personas que han participado en esto, y es en verdad desde líderes indígenas, líderes sindicales, líderes empresariales, líderes religiosos, y es realmente ver cómo estas personas nunca se habían sentado a escuchar al otro. Entonces, parte de la hipótesis es que lo que México necesita es que los muchos Méxicos se hablen, dialoguen, y al final de cuentas, o sea, muy pronto en el ejercicio te das cuenta que tienes que colaborar con el enemigo. Muy, muy pronto. ¿Por qué? Porque una persona, te haces amigo de alguien que está aprobando una ley que te va a perjudicar, o estás peleando por algo y estás sentado junto a alguien que históricamente ha causado mucho daño a tu comunidad. Entonces, existe realmente o sea, para mí esto ha traído muchísima luz de hacia dónde puede ir el país y muchísima esperanza. Es muy complejo, es muy lento, es muy experimental y vamos aprendiendo mientras vamos avanzando. Entonces, ¿qué va a pasar en 5 años con México Posibles? No, no sabemos. O sea, apenas estamos viendo cómo vamos a atender el segundo fin de semana de esta generación. Pero bueno, muy agradecida con Adam, porque gracias a toda su experiencia internacional hemos logrado convocar a líderes de primera y con una enorme diversidad, pues, para ver cómo creamos, ahora sí que los Méxicos posibles, que esperemos sean mejores que lo que estamos viviendo hoy. Y con esto les regreso el micrófono para la entrevista, y después de la entrevista con Adam, aquí voy a estar por si tienen preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Vero. Thank you very much. So, what a weekend, no?
Yeah.
You had a good experience.
Yes, it was, you never know with a new group what's going to happen, but I think we have a momentum now from now having worked for almost 3 years, and it went very well. And, sorry. The diversity is extraordinary, from business leaders to, I think, quite intermittent, maybe.
Perhaps with a
Yeah, I think it might work
standard
better.
mic. Okay.
Sorry, now I don't have to focus on the microphone. Yeah, so the diversity is extraordinary, and the what's powerful about that is not, or what's important about that is not the diversity for itself, but the diversity as necessary to understand what's really happening and to make a difference in what's really happening. And for me, what was very impactful was to hear in the final comments from the workshop, many people saying, many very experienced and senior and educated people saying, whoa, things are more complicated than I had understood. So yes, it was a great start and a great continuation of this, what I consider to be an extraordinary project.
Great. And yeah, like the main reason we are here, most of the people here, if not every single person here, we are collaborating somehow with each other, because we foresee that future. We have that hope. We see that we can really change how things are, and we need to collaborate, which is sometimes much more difficult than what we think. No? It's a trendy word to say, let's collaborate. It's quite difficult sometimes. So what would you say are the key elements that must be in a collaboration, and how can we really lower down the resistances that we find sometimes during those collaborations?
Yeah, so my whole professional life has in a way been about promoting collaboration, and especially collaboration among diverse actors. Again, not for itself, but because I think this is necessary to address most of the important and difficult challenges we face in Mexico and everywhere else. So I'm, in a certain way, pleased that collaboration, and in particular multi-sector collaboration, is so fashionable. but I think that the challenge is underestimated. It's more difficult than it seems, and therefore, because we're surprised at how difficult it is, we revert or we default to force. And I think the basic difficulty is that the joke they make in Argentina is collaboration means you agree with me. That's not only in Argentina. And so I think we have in general, we have a simplistic model of collaboration that it involves, we have a clear objective, we have a team, we all have the same interests, we agree on what the problem is, we agree on what the solution is, we agree on what the plan is, we agree on what everybody's going to do to execute the plan, and collaboration is about that road. And in my experience, in multi-sector settings, none of those assumptions are true. They are not true, they cannot be true, and therefore that model does not and cannot work. And what has surprised me is how dominant that model is. This idea of and I think at its root, it's you could say a unitary or an authoritarian model, that there's one objective, there's one team, there's one plan, there's one solution, there's one boss. And maybe that can work in an organization, although I think even so, less than before. But when we talk about multi-sector collaborations, what was, the first fact about the Make What's Possible is nobody is anybody's boss, really. There's 40 people, and they are really independent actors who all have in different ways a source of authority and power and resources. And so that model does not and cannot work. And so what for me has been interesting in this book and in this work and in Make What's Possible is what is another model of collaboration? And I think to come now to your question, the first thing to acknowledge is it's not as simple as being we're all together, we're one team, let's think about Mexico. This is not only simplistic, but manipulative. And to recognize, no, there are multiple Mexicos, there are multiple interests, and therefore it is inevitable, not accidental or avoidable, it is inevitable that there will be conflict, as well as connection, and the processes we use must acknowledge that and work with that, and not be afraid, and not say, oh, no, this can't work, I'll go back to just making sure it's done my way.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned that we usually jump into solutions, no? We jump into the plan. And sometimes that plan, when we are thinking about the strategic planning, no, or this objective in the long run, can work or cannot work. But you also talk in your books about the transformative scenario planning, which is another approach of that planning. So what's the difference with the usual or the standard planning that we are used to versus this method?
Well, it's always difficult to choose a title for a book, and in a way the title's transformative scenario planning is completely misleading because it's not about planning at all. I chose the title because I was trying to make a connection to an existing body of work, scenario planning, strategic planning. There's not many famous intellectuals from Montreal, so I have to cite them whenever I can. And Henry Mintzberg is a longtime management professor at McGill University. He wrote a thick book called The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning, and after you've read about 500 pages, you come to the key sentence, which is strategic planning is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms that the process of strategizing and the process of planning are actually contradictory activities. And so I think in the work we're involved in, and in all social efforts to address complex social challenges, planning is a completely inadequate way of thinking about what we're doing, for the simple reason that we don't know what will work. We can't know what will work. It was Henry Mintzberg who pointed out that even in companies that he studied, they think they're doing intentional strategy, but in fact, most of the time, the strategy emerges over time. It's an emergent strategy. And if this is true most of the time in companies, it's true 100% of the time in complex social contexts. Because we don't know what will work, and we don't have enough trust to agree, okay, this is what we're going to do over the next years. At best, we can agree, let's try this next. Let's try this and see what will happen, and see what we can learn. And so, so the contrast to a planning approach is an experimental approach, and this is very unfamiliar and uncomfortable for actors from most sectors who wish that they could be in control of what will happen. We would like to be in control, but we can't be. So the transformative scenario planning and the stretch collaboration, which we are employing in México Posibles and in similar projects all around the world, abandon this assumption of control.
Mm-hmm. As now that we are not controlling that fact that there's a jeep, a great jeep in the entrance. The plates are MUY, if you can hand in the keys to Juan. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, so sorry for that. So we are thinking a bit. We're talking about this kind of ambiguity, no, of trying to handle the fact that if we are planning for the long run, there will many things that will change in that trajectory, no, and that can lead also to frustration and can also lead to sometimes some confusion. How can we deal with that? How can we deal with the fact that we don't have control over things, and because we are not programmed to do so, no? We want to see results. We want to see quarterly results sometimes. How do you handle that frustration and that long-term vision that can carry some frustrations within?
Well, I'm not saying that it's not useful to make a plan. I'm not saying it's not useful to have a vision. I'm not. México Posibles has a vision, which is to address the challenges of ilegalidad, inseguridad, inequidad. So that's a vision. And we try to organize ourselves to move forward. I think what's needed is simply to recognize that some things that we wish were true aren't true. Mm-hmm. So most of us would prefer that things are done the way we want them done, that things work as we wish they would work, but that is in essence a fantasy, as anybody who has had teenage children knows. So actually in reality, the scope of control is quite small. And so I think the basic point I'm making is abandon that illusion and find another way. The nicest metaphor I ever found, Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader, was once in an interview describing the evolution of the Chinese economic model, this capitalism with Chinese characteristics. And he said, we're crossing the river feeling for stones. So we don't know. I mean, we're trying to get there, but we actually don't know. And I don't think anybody knows Mexico is not a problem that has a solution that can be negotiated and then implemented. It would be nice if it was like that. It's not like that. So we have to feel our way, and we have to feel our way not alone, but together with other actors who we cannot control and with whom we have real differences, not imaginary differences. It's not just a little misunderstanding that if we had a cup of coffee, everything would be okay. These are genuine differences of interests and of experience and of worldview and of cosmology and of ideology, and they cannot be eliminated. So the question is, how do you work in contexts where you can't control the others, where you don't agree with the others, where you don't know what will work, and so this is the challenge, as I understand it, and this is what Rios and México's Posibles are. We are feeling our way forward of how to do that. Yeah.
Thank you. You have a book that is called Power and Love, which sometimes we feel like contradictory forces, no? And in social entrepreneurship, there's like an intersection where we try to combine both forces, but sometimes it's also very difficult to see when to prioritize one or the other. So what would be your comments on that? How do we get that balance? How do we include it in our everyday work?
Yeah, so in this work, there are a number of tensions, and in my experience, this tension between power and love is central. To understand this statement, you need to understand the definitions I'm using, because these are words with many meanings, but I'm following a particular set of definitions, a man named Paul Tillich, who said that power is the drive of everything living to realize itself, so the power for growth, for self-development, whether it's of an individual or a community or an organization, and love is the drive to unite the separated. Collaboration, so collaboration, in as much as it's about coming together or working together, has that love dimension and requires power. And yes, they are commonly understood to be in opposition. But the phrase which inspired me to write this book is a sentence from one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s final speeches before he was assassinated. He was a student of Paul Tillich, and he said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive." So this idea that we push for what we want, for what we need, for what our organization needs, for our project, for our vision, without a sense of connection to others, is reckless and abusive, or even genocidal in the extreme. But that's only the first half of King's sentence. And he says, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So this idea that just being together, being connected, being in dialogue, and ignoring power or not employing power is sentimental and anemic. I would say sentimental and anemic at best, and at worst, cynically reproducing the status quo. So yes, I'm very interested in this. How do you employ both? This is King's point, that one without the other is always a bad idea. And there is a polarization in our society, in our families, in our organizations between the power people and the love people. We outsource the other function to our spouse or our HR department or the charities. And I'm arguing that this is always a mistake, and that what is required is to learn to employ both. And the clue to how to do this is not about a static balance, but about first one and then the other. And there is a man in Montreal named David Culver. He was the CEO of Alcan, the aluminum company, and he was considered a very extraordinary manager. And he retired about 5 years ago, and a professor interviewed him and said, what was the secret? What made you such a great manager? And he gave a very extraordinary answer, which is exactly about this. He didn't use these words. He said, when I'm tempted to be compassionate, I'm tough. And when I'm tempted to be tough, I'm compassionate. So this is exactly it. It's this moving between these two drives, the power drive and the love drive, and not choosing one. The mistake is to choose one. And this is the error, is to imagine we just need to push and drive and assert, or we just need to dialogue and love one another and come together. And this is an incorrect framing. We need both, and that's I believe this is the core practical and maybe even spiritual challenge of this work.
I wish to keep this conversation open. So I'm going to do one more question, and then I would like to open up to your questions. So systemic change, which is something that just as collaboration, we use it a lot, especially in this sector. So we know we are heading there. We know it's the main objective, but sometimes in our daily work, we forget it. And we would like to have some advice or tools or any recommendations you have to keep it in mind and to turn it into our everyday practice.
The way I think about it is that some of the things we're trying to do, we don't need to change the system. We just need to do our project within the existing system. If I want to you and I drove this morning from where you picked me up to this place. There is a system, there are roads, there's an Uber system. We didn't need to make a systemic change. We employed the system as it functions. We might have been frustrated with the traffic, but we don't need a systemic change. So let's not imagine that we always need systemic change for everything. However, for many of the issues that we are concerned with in this sector, and specifically these challenges of inequidad, ilegalidad, inseguridad, these require that the system is malfunctioning. Or another way to put it, maybe more importantly, there's an aphorism in the systems thinking field. The system is perfectly designed to produce the results it's now producing. This is really important. System is perfectly designed to produce inequidad, ilegalidad, inseguridad. So if we want to change those results, we have to change the system. And of course, there's lots to say about that, but the aspect of it that I am focused on, or that my colleagues and I are focused on, is that must be done with the participation of actors from across the system, unless you want to do it through authoritarian means. Mm-hmm. And I think in the end, that's always the choice, or a choice. Is the change going to be imposed mano duro by the great leader, by the visionary president, by the brilliant analyst, by the whatever? Is it going to be imposed benevolently, violently, whatever? Or is it going to be co-created? And so many of our leadership systems assume the former. So what we're really, I think the experiment in Mecos Posibles is to see, is there another way to create systemic change with not the consultation, not simply consulting other actors, not simply making a survey, not simply having an advertising campaign, not simply having a meeting, but through a genuine process of co-creation with actors who are involved and whose lives depend on it. to change other. I learned early on that it's not that people don't like change; it's they don't like being changed. They don't like being forced to change. Nobody does. Nobody in this room does. So why would we do it to others? But the alternative is actually very challenging. How do you work in genuine co-creation with people who you don't have experience of working with, whom you don't necessarily agree with or like or trust? It's interesting, one of the members of Meicos Posibles is a brilliant social actor doing grassroots work in the barrios, really doing amazing work, and has been a great teacher to me over the course of these workshops. And he said to me on Friday night, he said, "Adam, I'm glad that there's feelings of trust in this group, and we enjoy being together, but actually this is not about friendship. That's really not why I'm here. When I want to be with my friends, I go to the barrio. This is about who's going to be my allies, and that's a higher bar. To be an ally is a different thing than to be a friend, and I think the challenge of systemic change is alliances. We say in Meicos Posible, redes y alianzas across sectors, including people who do not agree with or like or trust each other." I'll just say one more thing, if I may, before
Sure.
I've been doing this work for 26 years and literally all over the world, but one important set of experiences was in Colombia, starting in 1996. A small project, very much like Meicos Posibles, that was organized by a very important social entrepreneur in Cali, Manuel Jose Carvajal, with a young politician named Juan Manuel Santos, who was at that time unemployed, or not, anyhow, in a foundation. And it was a project very similar to Meicos Posible, a very heterogeneous group, included, by the way, the FARC and the ELN and the Autodefensas, 9 days of meetings in a hotel near Medellin. And anyhow, I've written a lot about that project, and it has been quite influential. And when Juan Manuel Santos, who, as you know, is now the president of Colombia, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last October, his statement, the statement from his office said, "This peace work we have done, one of the significant events was this set of workshops 20 years before, Destino Colombia." So I was very pleased, excellent advertising, immediately put it on my website, but I actually didn't understand it. I mean, it didn't make sense to me. I was pleased that he acknowledged that work, but why? Why would a set of workshops 20 years ago be still in his mind? So many things have happened in Colombia by many people, the United Nations, citizens movements. He was Minister of Defense. Lots of things happened. And so in April, I was in Bogota at a conference, and I had the opportunity to make a public interview of President Santos. And I asked him this question. I said, I'm very happy that you keep mentioning Destino Colombia, but why? Why do you remember these small workshops 20 years ago? And he gave a very interesting answer, which for me is connected to the point about friendship and allyship. He said, actually, Destino Colombia was the first time I understood that it's possible to work with people you don't agree with. And it's interesting because in his political tradition, and the dominant political tradition from which he comes in Colombia, and that I think dominates in Mexico and many places, is I'm going to do it my way. If you don't agree with me, please get out of the way, in brackets, or I'll kill you. And what he was saying is actually the only way forward is to find a way to move forward, even though we don't agree. How can we be allies even if we don't agree, even if we're not friends? And so this, for me, is the challenge of the work. If we could all agree and like each other and trust each other, that would be lovely. But I think it's actually completely unrealistic. So how do we move forward anyway?
Thank you. So I would like to open up for questions. Carlos?
Hola, Carlos. See.
Thank you. I just want to emphasize something that I hear and I feel from your work. I think you're challenging our paradigm, our current paradigm. And I think it's very strong, a very strong challenge, because we all were born, we studied, and we're working in companies based on few fundamental truths, like we can control, we can predict, and we can measure.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're suggesting is a transition into a different paradigm that is much needed if we want to face successfully the complexities of today. So my question to you is, based on your experience, what would be essential for a leader to change so that he or she can make the transition to a new paradigm of doing businesses, work, and dealing with the complexities of today? What would be essential for us to make that transition?
So I agree completely with your summary. So thank you. And I guess I'm saying what's necessary is to acknowledge reality. I don't know about your life, but I don't feel that I'm controlling what goes on around me. In fact, most of life is about dealing with things we can't control. People who don't. I notice the wonderful thing about writing a book is you're always thinking about it, and you notice things in the world that are happening all the time, but you're not aware of them until you realize you're thinking about it. One of the things I realized in the middle of writing this book is I can easily spend hours every day thinking about what I wish other people were doing, what I wish my clients were doing, my colleagues, my children, Mr. Trump. You know, it's in a way, it's very relaxing, you know? You just think about what other people should be doing. But I realize it's a complete waste of time. It really is a waste of time. The only thing that matters in the end is, what am I going to do? What am I going to do faced with this situation I can't control, I can't predict, and how am I going to take the next step forward? That's literally the only thing that matters. So if you are successful at controlling what goes on around you, I would say God bless. Congratulations. I don't know how you do it, but there are certain contexts, certain authoritarian contexts, or certain limited contexts, let me say, where that's possible. But certainly in the area of social innovation, it's completely impossible. You know, one of the interesting, the privilege of my work is to be able to work with extraordinary leaders. But really, I was overwhelmed with the commitment and courage of the Mexicans I'm working with, but also senior leaders. And one of the things that's interesting when you work with senior leaders, with presidents or CEOs, is you realize there's nobody so senior that they don't think somebody else is controlling them. So it's true, actually nobody's in control. It's a secret that nobody's in control, you know? This doesn't work. So, therefore, let's admit the reality, and how are we going to do it? And so, to try, let me give a more practical answer, because I know I've been saying over and over what the challenge is. The argument in the book, Collaborating with the Enemy, is it involves three specific transitions. It involves embracing conflict as well as connection, because it's inevitable, experimenting a way forward, because we can't plan our way forward, and most crucially and most challengingly, stepping into the game, being willing to change ourselves. So the basic assumption implicit in almost all social change work is, when we say the system must change, what we really mean is other people must change. And this is an unrealistic and an immoral stance. So, I think you and I have spoken about this before, that the old saying from the 1960s, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem, is actually not the important point. The important point is, if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. If you can't see how what you're doing is contributing to things being the way they are by definition. Or it follows logically you have no leverage to change things except from the outside by force. So I think this is the essential challenge for the social innovation sector, to step into the game being willing to change ourselves. Otherwise, it's just a fancy form of authoritarianism.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Hi, Adam. So when you were mentioning about how to collaborate with people that you don't agree with or you don't like, what would be a good approach to make them actually collaborate with you when they're like in another totally different page or they're not willing to collaborate?
So I'm going to pick on the words you used, not to be mean to you, but because almost everybody asked the question with the word you used. How can we make them? So I've heard the question with those words 100 times. And the answer is you can't. So you can't make anybody do anything. Really, it's important. It has to start with that assumption. You can't make anybody do anything. So the starting point, I would suggest, is, and this is not easy, especially in situations of conflict, but to try to understand what are they trying to do? What's going on with them? What's their experience? What is their history? What is their objective? What are their needs? You have to start there. And if you don't start there, you will encounter resistance. Because as I said, it's not that people don't like to change, it's that they don't like being changed. They don't like being made to do anything. And I think the starting point for Meicos Posibles, and Veronica has done an extraordinary job, is meeting people where they are. The participants in Meicos Posibles, they share an agreement that the situation in Mexico is problematic. That's an understatement, that we really have a serious problem, but they don't agree at all on what the problem is or what the solution is. They have different ideologies and objectives, etc. And so you have to start there. You have to start with where they are, not with what you want them to do. And this is simple, but not easy.
Thank you.
Someone else has a question? Luis? Just put the mic.
Let me just link your two titles because I think it's pretty interesting. One is transformative scenario planning. The second one is collaborating with the enemy. And taking one word, which is scenario, you first need to set up the scenario. And for that, you will need to hear what the different parties have as their own proper needs, as you were basically explaining right now. And then together with them, you probably go and plan it. And in order to transform it, you need to collaborate with each other. I don't know if that's a simplistic assessment of what you're saying, but in taking the question that was just made and your answer is particularly saying we need to agree what the scenario is, which is a problem. Is that where we start?
No. My central interest, or the core of my work, the work of Rios Partners, the work of Meicos Posibles, is how can we work together to address the challenges we're facing. So the larger issue is, how to work together with diverse others, collaborating with the enemy. The transformative scenario planning is a poorly named but useful technique for that. And the crucial, there's one letter, it's not in the title, but in scenario work, the crucial point is that the scenarios are plural. This is really important. And as you and I were discussing earlier, in corporations, there's a history of using plural scenarios, for example, in Shell, which was where I learned the methodology. But it turns out, and this was a discovery in South Africa in 1991, is that it turns out that this process of telling multiple stories, plural stories, is especially helpful in heterogeneous groups. Because on the one hand, you're acknowledging the uncertainty, that's the origin of the scenario work in Shell, but more fundamentally, you're realizing that there are multiple, that the future is not determined, that the future is not controlled, and that we have different ideas about the future. For example, in the Destino Colombia scenarios, the team did not at all agree on which was, quote, the best scenario. In fact, there was a big conflict between the guerrilleros who were in favor of the scenario of negotiation, or a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush is the name of the scenario, and the other scenario, Todos a Marchar, which became the Uribe program. So they didn't at all agree on what was preferable, but the correct part of this is they to some extent developed a shared language, a shared map of what could happen, and more fundamentally, they, through the process of building a shared map, they learned to work together and developed not necessarily friendship, but alliances. And in fact, the important story is not about the scenarios, but about what the alliances were able to do in hundreds of ways over the 20 years that followed. So the transformative scenario planning is not about planning, it's not even about scenarios, but it's about a means to an end of working together to change the future.
My name is Carla Mausinit. I'm so glad to be here with all of you. What I would like to ask is, how will you plan to deal with insecurity in Mexico, with this group of people? I mean, what will be like the option to do something, because we really need to do something now?
Bueno, una de los diagnósticos cuando se hicieron estas 180 entrevistas era que el problema de México era, o sea, había tres ejes rectores: ilegalidad, inseguridad y inequidad, ¿no? Y obviamente es uno de los temas más apremiantes, y hay una sección del taller de este primer fin de semana donde es historias de vida, ¿no? Y las personas se paran espontáneamente a contar algo de su vida, y es un momento que realmente toca y transforma la vida de todos, porque entre esos 40 líderes, pues muchos tienen historias realmente desgarradoras, ya sea desde la parte de ser víctimas o desde el ser autoridades lidiando con eso. Y uno de los temas de estos talleres es que no se dice nunca quién dijo qué, pero sí se puede decir lo que aprendiste, y muchos de los debates este fin de semana eran de personas tenemos personas del ejército, tenemos personas de la marina, y también esta vez por primera vez tuvimos a un policía, ¿no? Y el tema, muchos de los debates se volvieron estamos absolutamente rebasados como autoridades, nos están aventando allá afuera sin ningún respaldo, ¿no? Y por otra parte, otras personas diciendo, pero ¿qué onda con los derechos humanos? ¿Y qué onda con, estarías dispuesto a suspender garantías individuales para que entre la fuerza aquí? Porque se necesita, o sea, las autoridades están diciendo se necesita suspender las garantías individuales para que podamos realmente rescatar espacios donde ya es tierra de nadie, ¿no? Donde ya no hay un Estado de Derecho. Entonces, mi lección de este fin de semana es la enorme complejidad, ¿no? O sea, presidentes municipales absolutamente a merced de fuerzas mayores, y el tema de la seguridad es tan complejo que pasa por todo el sistema político. Entonces, fue un poco abrumador darnos cuenta de que cuando hablamos de inseguridad estamos realmente hablando nada más de la punta del iceberg, y esta diversidad del grupo logró que en muy poco tiempo se pudiera ver la enorme complejidad de esto. Sé que no contesté tu pregunta, a lo mejor nada más quedó todo peor, pero ese es el momento en el que estamos ahorita.
So, Vero has a huge understanding of this field substantively, so I won't add anything to the substance of her answer, but to say from a process point of view, I'm quite certain that the only way to deal with it is together. You know, I think some of us who are outside of, who are from the business community, as I have been, imagine there's certain things that, well, can't the government just do it? I mean, what's the problem here? I remember once talking to the head of the anti-corruption agency in Indonesia, and I thought, my naive understanding, corruption, like, why don't you just enforce the rules? What's the problem here? And it was clear to me, even in such a so-called straightforward matter, it is beyond the capacity of a single institution, unless you want well, I was going to say unless you want a dictatorship, but having worked in dictatorships doesn't solve the problem. So therefore, to embrace the complexity and to find a way to work together, in this case, with civil society and security forces and political actors and economic actors. And I am not at all certain what the results will be of México Posibles. We are crossing the river feeling for stones, but it is, in my experience, one of the most extraordinary and courageous efforts of this sort in the world. So I encourage you to learn about it and to find a way to contribute to it. It is a grouping of many of the most important and diverse leaders in the country who are so impressed. I think the thing, I'm so impressed with them as individuals, their courage, their commitment, their wisdom. If only they could work, if only we could work together. But this is difficult. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, Eduardo.
Adam, thanks again for your time this morning. One could tend to think about the enemy as merely somebody who you might not agree with or like. What happens when the enemy is actually an actor that's operating outside the rule of law? When the enemy is actually killing people or poisoning youth? I'm thinking about, drug cartels. They're actually an actor in a systemic problem that's affecting all kinds of aspects of Mexican life, or many countries' lives. So is there a line drawn of where you stop collaborating with that kind of enemy, or does it actually have to include them as well?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. This is really important. And I remember in the formation of the Destino Colombia team, long discussions about who to include and exclude within the Colombian reality. Thank you. You've reminded me of what I think is one of the most important points in this book. Collaborating is not the only option. It's not useful to talk about collaborating until you understand that it's only one of 4 options. And so you can work together. You can try to force things to be the way you want them to be, impose the way you need it to be, or you can adapt. I can't change what's going on around me. How am I going to adapt? Or you can exit, quit, emigrate, divorce, thoughts. Yeah, run away. And you always have that choice. And so it's complete to say that collaborating is the only option is an absurd statement. You can't work on everything with everybody, but nor can you work on nothing with nobody. I'm not even sure the right way to say that in English, let alone in Spanish. So this is very important to be discerning. Who do I want to collaborate with, when, on what? And I'm not making a blanket, first of all, I'm not making a blanket statement that you have to collaborate. On the contrary, I'm asking for greater discernment. And also, I'm not saying that you don't have real enemies. I mean, although I am saying that probably of all the people we think of as our enemies, maybe not all of them are our enemies. And so there's this whole process of enemification of constructing enemies. Scapegoats is a way people have written about this. And in that situation, perhaps a subset of the actors can collaborate to make the rules or to implement the rule. Or maybe, this is what but sometimes you do have to work with the real enemy. When I did this interview of Santos in April, there was a second question I really wanted to ask him, which I did towards the end of the interview. I said, what for you personally was the most difficult thing of making peace with the FARC and now with the ELN? And he gave a very roundabout answer, but then at the end I think he said what for me rang true. He said, the most difficult thing is I'm considered a traitor. So in his political party, in his family, I assume in his social circles, in his class in Bogota, he's considered a traitor. He worked with those people. He worked with the enemy. And that's the challenge. The challenge is we want to work together, and at the same time, we fear that if we work with them, we will betray what's important to us. And that's an insoluble tension. And that's why I chose the book. That's why I chose the title for the book. Because that tension, now, of course, the Santos or the drug trafficker is the extreme example. But I think we have this even in more normal situations. I'm not going to work with marketing. They're going to wreck my product. They must just do it. They must just do it the way my products go. They must just sell it and not give me so much trouble. So this happens all the time in families and organizations. But the reason I emphasize these dramatic examples is because it makes the dynamics so clear. And that's the basic tension, that collaboration has two senses, especially in English and French, also in Spanish. It means to work together, but it also means to betray. El colaborador, right? Colaboracionista. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. That will be Guillermo.
Hi, nice to meet you. In your surveys about the three problems, inequality, insecurity, and violence, I think behind all of them, there is one thing, which is impunity. And impunity is designed into the system because, as you say, the system is designed to produce the results it's producing. So I agree with you. I think collaboration is the most important word in the 21st century. And I think that we as social actors, it is up to us to organize and bring light when there is none. Because impunity happens when you're dealing in the shadows, in the obscure, and you allow these things to happen. As information becomes more transparent, things are more difficult to avoid. And, as we were talking about the bad guys, the cartels and all that, the cartels are not alone. They are able to act because they have protection from somebody within the system, which is benefiting from that. So in order for us to affect this change, I think we need to organize as a society and bring some part of the people who are in that system who might be willing to change. But as you say, there's multiple scenarios and multiple answers to it. But you are dealing against huge interests that you are somehow affecting when you want to bring change, and which also have a lot of power and resources to fight against that. So how do you move around those things in order to be able to affect the change?
Thank you. So I share your understanding of the situation, and I think there'd be two ways to answer the question. So one way is those people are really a problem over there, and the rest of us need to unite to defeat them. So and I'm not saying that's incorrect. I think an additional element, though, and so in some sense, Méxicos Unidos contra la Delincuencia and Méxicos Posibles are efforts to unite diverse actors in order to win over the forças obscuras. You could say it that way. But I think there's an additional question, the most challenging question of all, which is, in what way am I part of the system which is producing this situation? How am I, by my action or inaction, complicit in reproducing the system which is producing these results? And this is a very unsettling question. In a way, it's easier to say those evil people. And of course, I'm not disagreeing with your assessment, but in a way, as long as we focus on those evil people, it's like me spending hours every day thinking about what I wish my kids and Mr. Trump were doing, really. So I don't say that as an easy question or one that I have an answer to myself, but it's required. That's the third stretch. The third stretch is to step into the game, realizing that I am part of this. If I'm not part of it, I have no leverage at all to make any change. Until I understand what my role is in the way things are, it follows logically I have no way to change it. But this is very personally and politically challenging. And I think one of the things we have been able to do in Méxicos Posibles is create a space for autoreflexión. Because that's, I often tell the story about I did a lot of work in Paraguay with a wonderful Paraguayan facilitator, Jorge Talavera. Doesn't speak any English. I hardly speak any Spanish. So our conversations were really short. Like, let's get the chairs in a circle. But we had one code word we used. We used to talk about el clic. What was the moment everything changed? What's the definition of el clic? The definition of el clic is the moment when somebody realizes that they need to change what they're doing. Then you have agency, you can get things done, everything becomes possible. But until you can go from those people really ought to do something different to this is what I'm going to try and see if it works, you're not going to make any progress. But this is very challenging politically, personally, spiritually, economically. There's interests here. Yeah.
So we have one question more. I see Laura. Yeah.
Gracias. Okay, so it's a very strong word, enemy. And when you were saying the enemification of those people, right? I used to be a banker, and I used to think of some people as the enemy, right? And now that I've been in the impact space, I've realized that the enemy is not a person, but the problem or the challenge that we're facing. Because sometimes when we identify the enemy, so the person with the problem, we're almost assuming that the person will not be able to change ever, right? That they will always be part of that problem. And I've realized that people can change and that we can evolve, and that just identifying a single person with the problem sometimes was one of the paradigms in my mind that I had to change. And I was just wondering if during the book you ever come across that, instead of putting the enemy in a person, putting the enemy in the problem.
Yes, and so I think depersonalizing is useful, and that's part of what systemic understanding that that there's a challenge. I would say more, the word problem implies there's a solution, and in most of these situations, there isn't a solution, there's a way forward. Just like a marriage is not a problem that gets solved, it's something you work through, you work with over time. But it's important because my first book was called Solving Tough Problems, and Peter Senge initially refused to write the introduction because he said, this is a very unsatisfactory framing. So I think there's problems with the framing of problem. But I think, so I think there's problematic situations. There's situations which are difficult and that require us to change. So I think the most interesting version of this is what can we learn from the enemy? I dedicated this book to my enemies and teachers. So I think most of it, at least I'll speak for myself, my greatest learnings have come from situations or people that I found challenging and that caused me to go beyond where I was. And so yes, we face problematic situations. We need to work on them together. We need to reflect on our role in it, and we need to change what we're doing. And so I think learning from challenge is maybe more productive than solving problems. Yeah. Thank you, really thank you for your energy. And this whole thing started with a tweet 1 week ago where Javier said, "Do you ever come to Mexico?" No, sorry, you look alike, man. Bald head, beard, glasses. How am I supposed to tell you apart? Anyhow, it started with a tweet 1 week ago and saying, "Do you ever come to Mexico?" So this is how it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Así es, gracias Javier por hacerlo posible.
Sí.
Le hace honor al nombre que tiene en Twitter, Sináptico, realmente provocó ahí la sinapsis. Gracias Verónica justamente ahí por compartirnos esta experiencia tan rica de Méxicos Posibles, que sé que hay un buen camino por delante, pero con la buena exposición seguramente que avanzaremos. Sara, gracias por la maravillosa felicitación y sobre todo Adam Kahane, gracias.
Gracias.
De nuevo, este espacio está puesto en servicio del ecosistema de impacto social, justamente para detonar este tipo de reflexiones, catalizar iniciativas y bueno, ojalá que hayan salido con buen provecho esta reflexión. Y una última solicitud, ¿tomamos una foto grupal? ¿Les parece? Súper, antes de que agarre la lluvia. Foto grupal, ¿dónde, Blanca? Y un momento, si quieren saber también más acerca